I guess I will also start by saying that something that we have already know, which is that, you know, this is a really unprecedented time, and we have never, I don't think the world have ever seen a crisis of this scale before this. And you guys have probably are quite familiar with the phrase flattening the curve. And these are usually used by the medical professionals to explain why we need measures such as social distancing and movement control. And the idea is really just to try to suppress and contain the risk of infections. And I would like to also, and I think that you also already know by now that the pandemic is not the only crisis that we are facing. At the same time, we are also facing an economic crisis, or rather a looming economic crisis. So, we therefore, there's also this idea that we must do something now to also flatten the recession curve. So I don't think that anyone would dispute the need for us to have strict measures because that is necessary in order to control the crisis. But interestingly, there is also these two curves is actually invertedly related to each other. So, so as you can see, the stricter the measures that are taken by the government to actually try to flatten the curve, the more severe would be the crisis might be. As you can see from the red line is the pandemic curve, and then the blue line is the recession curve. So, so the idea is that the government have to do something to try to flatten the recession curve while we fight the pandemic. I think that we are also quite aware that things are no good, and there will be a global recession that is coming. The IMF has already predicted that the impact will be at least as bad as the global financial crisis in 2009, and that we can only expect a recovery by 2021. And there are some people who say that it might even take a longer time, up to 2 years. Because it's a global phenomenon, we are not the only country that are affected. We cannot use exporting our goods as a solution based on our export-oriented market. So we are most likely going to see a low growth, and the Bank Negara report that have just been released actually say that our GDP growth is forecasted to be between 0.5% to -2%. And as you know, many jobs might be lost. And I just want to show you this chart that I saw on Twitter. It's actually a chart about the US at the moment, where in the last 2 weeks, actually they saw 10 million people filed for unemployment insurance claims. And you can see that the spike, but of course the spike is very high because the chart is being checked. The scale is, because of the scale, and it's since 1967. But I think it's just to give an idea that the intensity of the crisis is definitely quite big, and there will be a lot of people that will be risking to lose their job. In Malaysia, there's a forecast by the Malaysian Institute of Economic Research that there might be 22.4 million people that might lose their job. And who are these 2.4 million? They will be mostly workers that work non-salary jobs. So they are gig workers, they are daily wage workers, and there are also some in the non-essential sectors, and particularly young people might also be quite badly hit by the recession. And I think I also saw a report just yesterday that SOXO actually reported about 40% increases compared to last year. There are 40% more people, increase of people who actually registered for the loss of employment. So that's kind of the challenges that we are facing now. And as you know that the government has rolled out the stimulus package that amount to 250 billion. The tagline is no one will be left behind. And I think to be fair to the government, actually it's not a bad package. There are some good points about the package, but there's also a question being asked of is what the government rolled out really enough to help those that are vulnerable and those that are in a very precarious kind of state right now. So if you look carefully at the 250 billion, a lot of them are actually loan guarantees and loan moratoriums. And it also includes the 40 billion EPF withdrawal that you can withdraw, which is essentially your own money. And of course, there's also a question of whether everybody has enough money in their account to draw out the money. So only 25 billions out of these 250 are direct cash injections. So these are the money that's given to B40 and 40 household, the Bantuan Prihatin Nasional. And we can see that the package, the policy approach has taken by the government is they are really focusing on at the household level. And on the other hand, they are not really doing a lot in terms of job support, what we call the job support or the company support. There is a wage subsidy for employers, but it's only 600 ringgit for every workers, and that if you are a company that especially if you're an SME that are really struggling because of the inactivity of economy right now, I think 600 is barely enough for you to retain your workers. And already there is 40% of the SME, based on the survey done by SME Malaysia, 40% say that they actually don't have enough cash flow to last until April. And as you might also know, there's 98.5% of our business actually SME, and SME employ like some 65% of the Malaysian workers. So definitely that's something that is quite a gap there to fill. And the other gap is also when it comes to concerning gig workers. So far, there's not much of an assistance, except if you're a Grab driver or taxi driver, you get a one-off 600. And this group of people that actually make up 26% of our total economic growth, they are also not included in the employee insurance scheme. So they are not protected when it comes to unemployment benefit as well. So just for the sake of comparison and also do some shameless self-promotion, REFSA actually recently published a paper where we compare the stimulus package of Malaysia, Singapore, and UK. And this is just an example to show that how different countries actually really take different approach when it comes to the policy intervention at different groups. So what you can see from the screen, you can probably tell that Singapore and UK, they are much more generous when it comes to the package for the workers. So for example, Singapore, they go all the way up to 9 months in terms of their wage subsidy. And they have a tiered system where for the normal sectors is 25% for each employee, but for the highly impacted one, it can go up to 75%. And then if you see the UK one, they actually support up to 80% of employees that are forced to take unpaid leave. And this actually also includes the self-employed persons. So they consider gig workers as someone that is paid a formal salary. So if you're interested, you can I can share you the link later. We also do a more quantitative analysis about how much money different countries are put in in helping different groups of people. And let's see. Yeah. So I know that a lot of you here are fresh graduates. So maybe the biggest concern you have now is what would this crisis means to you. And I think I have to say that not to discourage you, but I think that fresh graduate is definitely one of the people that will be affected. You know, just like back in 2009 when the global financial crisis hit, or even earlier, I think every so-called crisis cohort, they always have a little bit of a challenge in starting their careers in such a challenging time. And young people obviously are much more sensitive to all these external factors. And in Malaysia, the youth unemployment is actually 3 times higher than the adult unemployment. And so yeah, in 2009, there was an increase of youth unemployment. And already, even before the whole COVID-19 crisis, Malaysia already have a big big problem of a mismatch in terms of the graduates that we produce and the jobs that are available, and particularly the high skill jobs that are, and these graduates are actually looking for. So, for example, in 2019, we have how many? Sorry, 170 graduates, where there's only 98 jobs available, high skill jobs available. And of course, the other problems that we have been facing as a country is also very low wage and underemployment. So there is a survey done by Khazanah Research Institute that fresh graduates in Malaysia, they are actually willing to go until as low as 1,500 per month to take a job. And the average monthly salary is only 1,900. So this is really not a lot. And I think that there has also been research done by Bank Negara to say that if you are a single person living in Klang Valley, you will at least need like 2007, I think, to sustain yourself. So I think as a result of this, a lot of the young people are also more and more drawn to gig economy, and about 30% of the people between 20 to 24 is actually employed informally. So these are the challenges that some of these group of people would face. And I think that in terms of combating the economic crisis that are being brought by the COVID-19 health crisis, I think there's 2 levels of things that we need to look at. One is a short-term mitigating measures, or what we would like dramatic way, the wartime spending, because this is an unusual time and this is a crisis. This is a time of crisis which would require us to do spending. I think in the past, countries at war have been really look at a higher deficit kind of spending, and because these are necessary to actually to compensate the lost income by people and also support the livelihood of the people. So one of the things that we need to do is bigger direct cash transfers. And then more importantly, we should also focus more on actually preserving jobs. And this can be done by actually having a higher wage subsidy. The point is that immediately what needs to be done is SME, we need to support our SMEs, make sure that they have enough cash flow to sustain the crisis. And this can be done in various ways, like having interest-free loan facility, having more wage subsidy and more tax reliefs. But more importantly, I think this measure needs to be introduced with a commitment that whatever benefits that they do, they need to be committed to keep retain their workers. And then the last one I would like to mention is related to the young people. I think the government needs to urgently create more entry-level jobs with in sectors that not necessarily the conventional sectors, but actually sectors with more growth potential after the crisis. And this might include the need to help graduates to upskill themselves and reskill themselves, so that when our economy picks up again, we'll be starting at a good place. And the second level that I actually would like to talk about, and I actually think that is more important, is how from the lesson that we learn from this crisis. You know, there's a saying that we shouldn't let a crisis go to waste, because these crises have actually, in a way, exposed a lot of the weakness of our economy and our society and our government's structure. So I think one of the areas that we need to definitely look at in the longer term is that we definitely need a more diverse and more knowledge-based economy that can turn our country into a high-income status. So this would include actually incentivizing industry to take up in a faster way the process of digitalizations, automations, and other adoptions of other technologies. And I'm sure like a lot of you are using tech more these days because of the MCO, and I feel that, you know, sometimes the society and the economy need this kind of crisis to actually force us to think harder about the way we do things. And we definitely also need a more robust social safety net, as we can see where there's a lot of people that are actually falling through the cracks, and we need to do something about it. And our healthcare system, we have not been really investing in our healthcare system. I think public hospitals is only about 30%. About almost 70% of our hospitals in Malaysia are private. And we need to really think harder about things that are public goods and how we can have a greater investment into this area. And then the other last two that I want to talk about, one is that there's this idea of security when it comes to planning our economy. And one of the particular area that we observe for the last few weeks is this problem of food security. How do we make sure that we have enough, we can produce enough food ourselves, and how do we make sure that this food are being accessible to everybody. And I think Jaikan wrote a very good paper about that. And the last one I want to say is that we need to also improve our cities in front of climate change. I think that just like the pandemic, climate change is one of the future global issue that we will face. This is something that we cannot take lightly. So I am going to wrap up. So just the last slide. So I think that because we talk about what is the future, what does the future look like, and what does it mean for us. So I just want to say that, you know, they always say that crisis is also opportunity. So the COVID-19 crisis has definitely changed our world in a big way. And it's not going to be an easy time for all of us in the next 2 years at least. But this is also a chance for us to actually think hard and actually reshape our world. And I think that as young people, you're in a very good place to do that. So I just want to mention a few points before I talk about your career choice. One is that I think that we need to rethink about the role of government, whether government should actually play a bigger or smaller role in our life. And I would actually just want to introduce you to one of my favorite economists by the name of Mariana Mazzucato. She wrote a really good book. If you have time for the rest of the MCO and you want to read some book, I will recommend this to you. She actually debunked a myth of government that, the fact that R&D and innovations should all be done by private. And what she has said very well in her book is how a lot of the investment into innovation and R&D in our society that actually brought a lot of good social impact to our world is actually investment by government. And she said one of the example that she used is actually iPhone. We always thought that iPhone is a private innovation, but iPhone is only possible because there's internet and there's GPS and so on and so forth. And for things like internet and GPS, actually it was a result of the investment by the US government into the research agency. So I think that this crisis have really taught us something about how we should perceive the role of government in terms of investing in public and innovation. And then some of you might know about this. There's also this idea of how do we conduct our capitalism? How can we shape our capitalism? And in the Davos meeting and World Economic Forum, there is an idea that we should move from being a shareholder capitalism that is based on profit to a stakeholder capitalism where it actually focuses more on solving some of our social and world problems. So I just want to leave that for you to think about, and of course you are welcome to tell me what you think. And in terms of because I know that this is also supposed to be sort of like a career choice thing. I cannot really advise you specifically, but I think that in every crisis there's always winners and losers when it comes to different sectors. And I think that for you, if you are a fresh graduate, there is definitely different opportunities for you, even though it's going to be a very bad economic climate. And just like how in the last financial crisis, I think a lot of people that wanted to join banking and finance sectors, they end up joining different sectors such as the tech sectors, etc. So these are some of the growth sectors that we should look at, and we should definitely think about what are the sectors that have most growth potential. But not just that, I think that the other thing that you should think about is also the social impact of your career choice. So what kind of impact will whatever career that you choose, what kind of impact will you create to the society? And I think that this is one of the best time for us to think about that, because we all know that when a crisis like COVID-19 strikes, all of us will be affected, and all of us are actually in this together, and we all have to play our part. So I think with that, I will stop here because I've talked a lot.